On April 9th, 1987, at around 7 p.m., a man rushed into a grocery store looking for his girlfriend. He was frantic, and he was coming to tell her that something truly awful had happened. Her baby was unconscious and being driven to the hospital in an ambulance. Baby Jacob Blondine would die while in surgery in the early morning hours of April 10th, 1987. Was it a terrible accident, or was Jacob a victim of abuse? I'm Eric Carter Londine,
And I'm Charlie Worrell.
and this is Crime Lines and Consequences. And today we get personal, Charlie.
You're getting personal. Well,
Yeah.
I think our audience has heard us reference your role as a family advocate for your own brother's case and for other cases as well. And I'm not sure that everyone really understands what that means. Not so much what it means, like your story and your brother's story, but what that means to advocate.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody knows what it means until you're forced to do it. And and even then there really isn't a handbook or a guidebook on how to do it. So you're kind of left to your own devices. I think we will give a little bit of a recap in the
Mhm.
case just for people that may have not heard it yet.
We have a lot of ground to cover, things people haven't heard before.
Yeah, a lot. And I'm just going to trigger warn everybody. So we are talking about child abuse. We are talking about the death of an infant. So if that's something that you emotionally cannot handle, we understand. Take care of yourself.
Mhm.
But share the episode
Yes,
if you're
absolutely.
leaving, so that we can get more ears on Jacob's
Mhm.
story. All right. So, Charlie, I think I'm going to ask you to help guide me through this conversation
Okay.
because I am extremely angry and I tend to bounce all over the place whenever I'm in that frame of mind.
Right. So if you want details on the case, Eric has covered it on True Consequences with a very heartfelt conversation with his mom. There's also, Crime Lines style coverage over on Crime Lines where I got into the case file thanks to Eric providing it to me, and we got into some of the details of what happened and what was said. But just the high level story here is that Jacob was alone with his stepfather. Something happened. He was rushed to the hospital where he later died.
Yeah.
That's high level enough. I mean,
Yeah, it is. I think other some things to know, I think that might be important for people
mhm,
who aren't familiar with the case. So, my mom's boyfriend was the person who was alone with Jacob at that time. This man was not a stranger. And so I know that there are often situations where, abuse happens and sometimes I think people want to believe that it is a stranger. Oftentimes, the majority of the time, whenever
mhm,
people are being abused, it is by somebody they know. So my mom knew this person her whole life. They grew up together. They went to church together. His dad was a pastor. His dad married my parents. His aunt is my godmother. His sister married my mom's brother. So, like, our families were all very connected to each other. We all knew each other. And my mom had no reason to believe that this man was capable of what we believe he did.
this wasn't a boyfriend who she had just met, didn't know very well, obviously had known him very deeply,
Mhm.
and he had other children.
Yeah.
And they seemed fine, so there were reasons for her to trust him.
Yeah. And so when Jacob started to have injuries as they were dating and he started to blame me, it was my mom, it was easy for her to believe that that was possible because I did have some jealousy towards Jacob as somebody who was an only child.
Mhm.
I don't remember being jealous to the point that I wanted to hurt him. And I have pretty decent memory of that time in my life. I remember being jealous of his name. I remember thinking that his name was cooler than mine. I think I said prettier than mine. And my
That's
grandmother,
such a little kid way of thinking.
it really is. It really is. My grandmother told me that my name meant princely.
Mm,
So then I was like, "Oh, well, I'm good then." So, like, that's what I remember about being jealous, and the reason I'm talking about this part of the case right now is because this whole conversation kinda comes up later as we go into what's
mhm.
going on with Jacob's case and what has happened with Jacob's case. So I don't recall, like, physically hurting Jacob, but I think it's possible that that happened. One of the first injuries that Jacob got was a fracture on his skull that led to a hematoma needing to be lanced and drained. And from that point on, he was really starting to be fussy. He wasn't feeling good. He started to have a lot of like ear infections and sinus infections and things like that. And then he had an allergic reaction to some medicine. So all of this is happening. My mom decides to send me to California to live with my dad. And while I'm away, within I think 3 weeks, Jacob was dead.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to know that because even though there was some doubt and some question about whether or not I was jealous or whether or not I was hurting Jacob, when I was removed, the injuries didn't stop. I feel like that's going to come up later. Let me try to think about what other pieces of information. So, an important thing to note about this suspect, who is somebody I have not named yet, not naming him today, but you can anticipate that that'll probably come out in the future. He changed his story at least 4 times.
Mhm.
I think it was maybe 5. I don't remember the exact number, but these weren't like small changes. These were pretty drastic changes. Like one was Jacob was sitting on the couch and fell off and hit his head on the coffee table on accident. There was a weird one where he said he put his beard between Jacob's legs to tickle him and felt Jacob losing his balance. And so as Jacob was falling, he lifted his head up and knocked Jacob even further, and Jacob went flipping and hit an armchair. So there's just a bunch of different stories here. I don't understand why his credibility isn't a problem, but my family's credibility is, but that's okay. We can get into that later. Charlie, is there anything else of note that you feel like I need to bring up in this kind of recap moment?
Um, the thing that I harp on, sometimes in cases I hyperfixate on one aspect, and one here is that in the case file, they schedule a polygraph,
Mm,
and he is going to be polygraphed, and then it says polygraph canceled because he confessed.
yeah,
The
yeah.
confession, Eric, what's the confession say? Do we know?
Charlie, I wish I did know. I wish I did
The
know.
the the confession, the reference to it is in the case file.
Yeah.
The actual confession is nowhere to be found.
That's correct. It is missing. And I did speak with the investigator who took the confession, and he
Mhm.
confirmed for me that he, in fact, recorded it. He, in fact, wrote it down and had it signed as an affidavit, and it doesn't exist. Nobody knows
So
where it is.
so we don't know what he confessed to. We don't.
No,
And
we don't.
we just know that there was a confession.
And actually, I looked at the documents again, and there were actually two confessions. There was one to Patrick Apodaca and one to the assistant chief Johnny Trujillo. So he had
Mhm.
confessed not once but twice, and for sure the first one was memorialized. I'm guessing the
Mhm.
second one would have been too. However, neither of them exist, which is frustrating. And I know I don't seem very sad today. I think it's because I'm so angry that, like, I'm sure I'll cry at some point during this conversation, but like, I'm so angry right now that I'm not sad. I'm very, very angry.
And I definitely wanna get into that. That's probably the first thing I wanna talk about. I do wanna, just so that our listeners are aware,
Mhm.
you and your mother did not learn about these confessions until you got the case file literally decades later.
That's correct, Charlie.
Like,
Yeah,
I want that to be clear. I don't want people to think your mom knew he confessed because of what comes next.
yeah. She didn't know that he confessed, and she also didn't know that the polygraph that he was given, that he failed it.
Right.
Neither
Because
of
he said
us
he
knew that.
passed.
Correct. Yeah, we were waiting outside in the car while he was doing that in Santa Fe, and he walked out. He was in a great mood. My mom asked him how it went. He said, "It's great. I passed." And we believed him because he walked out of the state police building. But
Mhm.
decades later, we found out that, in fact, he failed that polygraph.
Yeah, and I think that moment speaks to how much your mom did trust him,
Mhm.
and she had no reason at that point not to.
Absolutely.
But,
Absolutely.
I've covered this case on Crime Lines, and at the time, um, you were still working to get this case reopened.
Yeah.
So what has happened since then?
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of people that have listened to me on True Consequences probably know this. Maybe some of the Crime Lines listeners, if they don't listen, may not know this. So I started True Consequences not necessarily to start advocating for Jacob's case. In fact, when I started True Consequences, I really was under the impression that there was nothing that could be done with Jacob's case. That's what I had been told because we had the case reopened in 2005 by the State Police Cold Case Unit, and Dr. Sergeant Thomas Christian, he did probably the best investigation
Mhm.
out of any of the investigations that have been done on this case. It was the most thorough. It was the most uh, compassionate, conscientious investigation that had ever been done. Unfortunately, though, despite all of his work and
Mhm.
despite his hypothesis or his belief, I should say, that my mom's boyfriend was responsible because at the time there was a statute of limitations on manslaughter, um, negligently caused, as well as I believe second degree. Um, and I think it was 15 years. So at that point, the statute of limitations had passed for that particular charge. And and it makes sense because when you look at all of the evidence and you look at everything, it's not likely that they would be able to bring forth a charge of first degree murder.
Right.
Um, there's just too many questions. There's too many things
Mhm.
that aren't clear, and then the fact that the evidence is missing also makes things a lot more difficult.
A lot more difficult.
So we had that investigation done. That's when all that information was discovered about the
Mhm.
confession, um, about the lie detector test, about all of that. Um, so when I started the show, I was talking to families. I really was just trying to give back to my community and also just to help other families not feel like they're so alone. This is
Right.
probably one of the loneliest things that we've ever done. And
Mhm.
and it continues to be that way, and I know we have, like, thousands of people that have heard Jacob's story, and there's people that are sharing on social media, and I'm not trying to discount that, but as it pertains to, like, having someone to call and say something about talk about what's going on in the case, like, I could talk
Mhm.
to you about it, Charlie,
Right.
but you're not really in that place, like, you don't
It's not the same.
not the
It
same.
really isn't, because I can say, "Wow, that sounds like that'd be awful," because it does sound awful, but I don't know
Right,
what that feels like. I can imagine what it feels like, but I don't know,
right.
and it's that lack of depth of understanding that is the problem, where it's hard to speak to people about experiences we've had, particularly traumatic ones, when they've not been there.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
in this case, there are a lot of very unique aspects that I feel also make it more difficult for you even within the space of true crime with other
mhm,
families. A lot of times, the other families did not then experience abuse at the hands of the
right,
person who likely killed your brother. They don't have that ongoing issue. They don't have that person in their life very long. For those who do, like Sarah Turney,
mhm,
um, allegedly, in my opinion only, had her sister's killer in her life for many years afterwards.
yeah,
It's a such a unique experience that I think maybe Sarah Turney's the only person I can think of who
yeah.
would understand that dynamic.
Yeah, and I do lean heavily on Sarah, but when I started the show, I didn't know Sarah.
Right.
I didn't know anybody really
Mhm.
that had been through what I've been through. So I started helping families, and at some point, I realized, like, I needed to tell Jacob's story.
Mhm.
Not because I thought it was gonna bring justice or change anything. I had no inkling that that was going to happen, but I just thought it was important for me if I was expecting other people to unburden and tell the
Mhm.
worst day of their life on my show, then I didn't wanna be a hypocrite. You
Right.
know, I had said to, Amanda Romero, her son Colin Romero, and his best friend, Ahmed Latif were left to die in the desert outside of Albuquerque, and I was interviewing her, and I said something along the lines of, "What you ignore, you permit, and if you stay
Mm.
silent, you can't expect things to change." And I'm really good at saying things, but I'm also really good at holding the mirror up to myself when I say those things and saying, "Hey, you're being a hypocrite."
Right.
So so I called my mom and I said, "Let's talk about this," and she agreed, and so what you hear in that episode, besides really bad audio quality, um, is the first time that my mom and I ever talked about Jacob's case together.
Mhm.
Because after Jacob died, my grandmother was very clear that we couldn't talk about Jacob. We couldn't say his name, and so we kind of shut it all inside of ourselves and kept it to ourselves. Which was really, really tough. But as we started to have this conversation, my friends that were listening to the show said, "Hey, I need you to talk to this former prosecutor." So I had a conversation with the former prosecutor about the case, and that pissed me off. Um, I think because she was looking at it from a prosecutor's perspective,
Yeah.
and I'm starting to realize that I don't really appreciate the perspective of a lot of prosecutors, um, which is wild, but, that's where we are, and, she pointed out a lot of the challenges that she would face if she was gonna bring this to trial, which are a lot of the same things that we're hearing as we're kinda going through this process.
Right.
But anyway, I found out later that the statute of limitations had been repealed
Okay.
and that it was made retroactive for cases prior to it being repealed.
Mhm.
So that's when I talked to my mom and I said, "Hey, I think we have a chance to maybe see if we can get this case reopened again. What do you think about, or how do you feel if I start going to all these other podcasts, trying to tell Jacob's story, trying to get people behind us so that, kind of taking a page out of Sarah Turney's book,
Right.
which she found herself in because the police couldn't get anywhere else and told her to do it. In my case, I was like, this person's doing it. They're getting a lot of attention.
Mhm.
Maybe that's what I need to do. So we started doing that. And then in April of 2020 or 2020, yeah, 2020, I think, we had 10 days of Jacob campaign.
Mhm.
And what we did was from April 1st to April 10th, we asked people to call, email, write letters, do whatever they could to get a hold of the district attorney in Socorro, New Mexico, which is where this happened, and tell him to reopen the case because the statute of limitations was gone. He lasted 2 days out of the 10 days of Jacob, which felt really, really good to me.
Yeah.
Um, and he turned it over to Hector Balderas, who was the attorney general at the time. And really, that was the only way that we could have gotten this case reopened because he was not going to do it.
Right.
Um, and so that moment for us was like a huge deal. We were so excited, finally got somebody to pay attention to us. Hector Balderas, he met with us, with his team. He said,
Mhm.
I can't promise you anything, but I can promise you that we're going to look into this and we're going to investigate this case and we're going to see if we
Mhm.
can find any evidence. And he apologized. He apologized on behalf of the state of New Mexico because they did not do their investigation the right way, mostly because the suspect was friends with the police that were in charge of that investigation. Um, and I do have now confirmation from one of the detectives who was investigating the case that they were colluding to cover it up. I wasn't in the past comfortable saying that, but
Right.
now that we've confirmed that, I am. So yeah, so that kind of led us to the case being reopened, the case being investigated, and us having a tremendous amount of hope that we were heading in a positive direction.
So how long did they have the case?
They had it for about 3 years. yeah, about 3 years before they decided they were done.
That sounds like a long time to do an investigation. So, I imagine that you felt like when the AG took the case, there's a new renewed hope because you
Yeah,
know Sikora is not gonna do anything, and you knew that, this entire time.
yeah,
So now it is out of their hands, it is someone new, someone who does not have connections to the small town, somebody whose brother, sister, whatever, is not married to this guy's best friend,
yeah,
you're free of all of that.
yeah.
What does that do when you're a family who's had, like, no answers and suddenly you have hope?
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's the best feeling in the world. It changes everything. I for me, it felt like from the time Jacob died until that moment, we were, like, under this gray cloud of it was
Mhm,
like a heavy burden where we just felt hopeless. We felt like there was no chance that everything that this person did, not only to Jacob, but to me and to my mom and other family members, is was gonna go unpunished forever. And
mhm,
not just that, but the heavier weight is the knowledge that this person how many people could this person have hurt in 37 years?
mhm.
That's what actually bothers me the most. Like, no matter what happens, Jacob's never coming back. We're never gonna get Jacob ever again, and it sucks. It's the worst. But beyond that, the thought of this person continuing to hurt others for 3, almost 4 decades is the stuff of nightmares for me.
And you and your mom were among those people he was hurting
Mhm.
when after he confessed 2
Yeah,
times and he was free to go and failed the polygraph, he was free to go, and you and your mom were his next victims.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, he manipulated my mom into marrying him by telling her that he had put her on his insurance at work as his wife, and that if they didn't get married, he was going to be arrested and taken to prison, which I don't know anything about insurance fraud laws, or how that worked back then. Um, it could be true, but my mom
Mhm.
really didn't know, and so she believed him.
And
And
we had no
also,
internet. We had no internet to look up
yeah,
insurance laws, will I be
right,
the first thing if Lars said that to me, I'd be, like, Googling it, but that didn't exist, and how
yeah,
much do you know about insurance fraud?
zero, zero, yeah, it's true. And so and also because he passed the polygraph in
Right.
quotes, um, it was like, okay, maybe this was an accident, maybe,
Mhm.
you know. So that manipulation, though, you start to see it as you look back, right?
Yeah.
There were so many manipulative tactics that he used to control us and to
Mhm.
put us into the mindset where he could control us. And it's definitely something that I recommend people educate themselves on. Look into things like love bombing and coercive control and financial control. Like, all of those
Mhm.
things are really, really important, and there are red flags that are associated with those types of behaviors that if you're paying attention, you can catch them ahead of time before things get too far. But yes, so we had tons of hope. We thought maybe there was a chance that they were going to actually investigate, and we really believed Hector when he told us that he was going to do everything in his power to
So
to do that.
so I have to ask because Hector's not the name of the guy I'm cursing out on social media. So so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Elections, we don't wanna think that an election has such a huge role in our justice system, but I
Mhm.
can go on and point out so many elections that changed the outcome of cases. I mean, at the most extreme level, the death penalty is a major one.
Yeah.
We saw that with the federal death penalty kinda making a resurgence all of the sudden. But as far as the elections in New Mexico, so what was it 2022?
Yeah.
That
That's when the election happened.
okay, and how did you see a change in the investigation and the communication?
Well, so a couple of things before we get into that piece of it is that decided consciously to stop talking about Jacob's case once the AG took over it, because I wanted to give them the space to do the investigation without me muddying the waters, without me, saying things that could potentially jeopardize what they were doing. And I just kind of backed off a little bit. And maybe I backed off too much. I asked for an update in 2021. The update was like, we're still working on it. We're still trying to find evidence. We're doing what we can. And then I knew that Hector's term was coming up, so I proactively reached out to the candidates for AG and asked them to come on my show on True Consequences. It was mostly selfish. Like
Mhm.
I wanted to meet them. I wanted to sit across from them. I wanted to tell them Jacob's story. I wanted to show them Jacob's picture, and I wanted
Mhm.
to let them know that like we are counting on the Attorney General's office to do their investigation and to hopefully make an arrest. There were 3 candidates. 2 of them agreed to talk to me. One
Mhm.
of them was amazing. Like, as soon as he walked in, he was like, "Hey, Eric, I've heard all about Jacob's case. Uh, I listened to your episode with your mom. My heart is broken for you. I can't promise you that I'm gonna be able to fix this, but I can promise you that I'm gonna do everything I can." And I
Mhm.
was like, "Wow, cool. I hope this guy wins." You
Yeah.
know? And I know that politicians will say things, but I
Right.
truly believe this person. And I believe that they had their best intentions when they were looking
Mhm.
at this office. The second person that I interviewed was Raul Torres, who did win the election,
Mhm.
and that experience was completely different. He showed up late. We originally were going to do a face to face. Last minute, his team was like, "Sorry, he can't. We'll just do it like online." So we did
Mhm.
Streamyard, and he was very. Ooh, how do I say this? He didn't seem very concerned. When
Mhm.
I introduced myself, I said, "Hey, I'm Eric. I'm not sure if you've heard of me or my brother's case, Jacob Lundin, or my show, True Consequences." He's like, "No, I never heard of it." I was like, "Okay, well, let me tell you a little bit about Jacob." And like the whole time I'm talking was like looking around, doing a bunch of other things, not really listening. Gave me an interview, it lasted about 20 minutes, and then was just kind of dismissive and moved on with his life. Unfortunately, he did win. And I did not have a good opinion of him after that conversation, but also after learning a lot of things that have happened under his administration, because he was district attorney for Bernalillo County before he was the attorney general. There's a lot of cases that have gone through when he was the DA that did not, I don't believe, were handled properly. One particular case was a rape that was caught on video, and he refused to prosecute.
Wow.
So how much more evidence do you need?
Mhm.
So my my heart kind of sank when he won. Um,
Yeah.
but I know enough about him to know that he cares about being elected. So in my mind, I was like, this can work. I can work, like, if we get to a point, which is where we are, where I feel like this person isn't the right person to be working on this case, or this administration, um, I could apply pressure
Mhm.
from the media and from social media to get him to do the right thing, because it will affect his electability.
Very similar to John Palmer, who we had as a guest, who wanted to make Katie's case a political issue so that these politicians would care.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But that was in my back pocket.
Mhm.
The thing about advocating, Charlie, is like it's like the worst game of chess you've ever played. Like the most complicated, confusing, difficult game of chess you've ever played. And the risks are very, very high, and the
Right.
rewards are few and far between.
Mhm.
So I just kind of put that in my back pocket. I'm gonna save that for later, just in case I need it. So yeah, the change in tone was definitely apparent, and the lack of communication,
Mhm.
was apparent. Um, but I was still holding on to hope that maybe there were prosecutors that were held over from the previous administration that were working on it. I still had the same family advocate in quotes. I still had the same family advocate, but yeah, it was all for naught.
Yeah, so you recently had a meeting with
Mhm,
the attorney general. You and your mom were both in attendance.
mhm.
Uh, we had gotten the group text, go in, fired up. It's this meeting's coming up. They want an in-person meeting. It wasn't just a letter or a phone call. And this was going to be a big deal. And unfortunately, it was a big deal in the wrong direction. So I want to hear more about the what happened because we haven't really talked a ton about like what actually happened in the meeting and like
Yeah.
what was said to you and what you said back. Said
Yeah,
in an
well,
elevated tone.
yeah, said loudly. Um, yeah, so there's 2 interactions with this a few interactions. The first one was this one on January 11th,
Mhm,
um, and they asked me and my mom to come into the office. And for me, that's not an easy feat because my mom, she's disabled. She's
mhm,
on a fixed income. Her car needed some mechanical work. And so I went and picked her up, which is 75 miles away. And then I drove 75 miles back to Albuquerque for the meeting,
mhm,
75 miles back to drop her off, and then 75 miles back home. So our hopes were high because they knew that this was happening. So we were like,
mhm.
there's no way that they would make us go through all of this just to tell us no. Um, we were wrong. So the advocate's sitting there kind of next to me, my mom's next to me, and then there's 2 prosecutors and an investigator across. And I really wish I would have recorded this conversation. Kicking myself now because I didn't think about it, but it's okay. I'll just recite it from memory. Uh, so it started with this really long preamble of, well, this is a really old case and there's a lot of problems with it and there's a lot of evidence that's missing. And we just, we hoped really hard that we could overcome some of these medical issues that we have in the case. And unfortunately, we weren't able to. So we're not going to be prosecuting. In that moment, my mom and I just started yelling at them at the same time. Um, it was like 37 years of rage that
Mhm.
we've suppressed just came out. And I'll give them credit, they sat there and they
They took
listened
it.
to it. They took it. They took it. I'll give them credit for that. The advocate had her arm on my shoulder the whole time, and that was just making me mad because I'm like, "I don't know you like that for you to be, like, touching me or trying to comfort me right now." Like, this it was weird. My mom was even noticing, like, it wasn't even, like, in a consoling manner, it was almost just like a dead hand on your shoulder, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't know
Wouldn't
how to
that be
describe.
against their I would assume in our space, we know like, when I met Tara Newell, who was known for the Dirty John case,
Mhm.
um, when I met her at TCPF, I asked her if she wanted to hug or not, because I would like to hug her, but I'm not going to go up and be like, "Oh, hey," to
Yeah.
someone who has suffered trauma, physical trauma.
Yeah.
And so to think of a victim advocate who is, like, touching someone who suffered physical trauma at the hands of the person you're talking about,
Yeah.
like, I just let's do some more training. Like, I don't even know what to say because
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that is something you have to teach, but then we have to be teaching it.
Well, and I feel like if you're going to give somebody that title, you should equip
Mhm.
them with the skills and the knowledge that they need to be successful,
Yes.
and being trauma informed is a huge part of
Mhm.
that, that I feel is severely lacking. And it's not probably fair to her because I think she's like 25 and probably just out of college and just trying
Mhm.
to do what she can. But I do blame those that are running that
Mhm.
administration for that. So y- the last thing I told them we said a lot of things to them. The last thing I told them was that the state of New Mexico was complicit in
Mhm.
any abuse that occurred after Jacob died, including what
Mhm.
happened to me and my mom. And and then I said the state's a joke. And I'm gonna I'm gonna cuss. Like I do cuss a lot. So just fair warning. I don't cuss that much on this show, but I do cuss a lot. Um, one of the prosecutors said, "Oh yeah, I know, this sucks." And I said, "No, it fucking sucks. It fucking sucks. It sucked then. It
Mhm.
sucks even more now." And I think we left it at that. They told us that they are not the type of prosecution team that is scared of hard cases. They don't shy away from difficult cases, but that this case is essentially impossible in their eyes. And they led us to believe that a thorough investigation was conducted. But I learned later that that's not true, which we can get into in a moment. One more thing I want to talk about as we're leaving this office after being given the worst possible news that we could have been given. Um, the advocate tells my mom and I as we're walking out, she's like, just so you know, we have this sculpture here in the lobby. It's a tree. And what we're doing is we're getting family members of victims to make their handprints and to write their loved one's name on it, and put it on the tree so that we can show everybody that we're here for the community.
Like, did she listen at all at that meeting?
That's
A
a follow up
handprint.
email. That's a
Yeah.
follow up email.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we also have this thing.
Right. It was like salt in the wound. It
Mhm.
really was, because you're telling me that you care about the community with this symbolic sculpture that you have in your office after you just told me that you didn't give a shit
Right.
about my baby brother or me or my
Mhm.
mom. And I think they would argue that that's not what they said, but that's what they said to me. I was so angry at even just being asked that. Why
Mhm.
would I want my brother's name in that office? That's the
Right.
last thing I want. Whew.
So they may not have said they didn't care about Jacob in that meeting in those words, but when you found out more details of the investigation, should we do our air quotes again on investigation? The reinvestigation they did in 3, almost 4 years, what at that point, like, what did you find out that they did? I mean, I don't know that your stepfather's talking. Has he invoked a lawyer? Did they even try?
Let's talk about that. So, after we left, my mom and I were very upset, as you can imagine. I think we wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, but as I drove back to Socorro to take my mom home,
Mhm.
as we talked about it, and then as I came home and then called my mom on the way back home to talk some more about it, I started to question, like, what they were saying.
Mhm.
Um, and so I decided as soon as I got home that I was gonna put in it's called IPRA, but it's a FOIA request,
Mhm.
Freedom of Information Act. Um, it's called Inspection of Public Records Act here in New Mexico, and it's a very strict law. There's not much that they can hold back, legally.
Mhm.
There's some stuff, like if it's an active investigation, but in my mind, I'm like, "This is closed, right? They said they're not gonna do
They literally
anything."
just said that.
Yeah. So I'm like, "I'm surely I can get all of the
Mhm.
information." Um, because in my mind, I'm already like, I need to do my own investigation.
Mhm.
So I put in the request and I get the standard, this is going to take 14 days. And then, like 4 days later, I get a reply to the request that says, here's all the responsive records we have related to this case. We've redacted it because of whatever law, whatever code. We are considering this matter closed. If you disagree, please let us know. What they sent me was my case file that I gave them.
I was gonna say, didn't you have to give them the case file because they didn't have it?
Yes.
Because some building burned down or something? Like
A couple of buildings burned down, actually. Yeah. So my case file, along with I think 3 other documents that came from the University of New Mexico Hospital, that didn't tell me anything I didn't already know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote back and I said, it's not closed as far as I'm concerned because you didn't even come close to giving me what I asked for. So let me make it very clear for you. I want to know who you talked to,
Mm-hmm.
when you talked to them, and what they said.
Yeah.
That's it. A couple weeks go by and it's radio silent. And my really good friend Lisa, she works in public records for the
Mm-hmm.
city of Las Cruces, and I was talking to her the whole time. I'm like, "Can you believe this? Like, this is all they sent me." She's like, "Well, either A, they have a lot more and they're not wanting to share it with you, or B, they don't have anything and they're like talking to their attorneys now to figure out what they're gonna do."
Because they only sent you back 3 things that you didn't already have.
Correct.
3, like, medical documents, not investigative, not interviews,
Correct.
not alibi witness, none of that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So time goes by, and then they reply to my request again, and they release additional documents. Oh, sorry, document. I think it was 4 pages long. It The thing that made me the most, like, a lot of it made me mad, but the thing that really, really got under my skin was this narrative that this investigator wrote out, and he kept referring to a Mr. Gordon, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Gordon. Well, Mr. Gordon is Mrs. Juanita Gordon, who was the assistant district attorney or was an investigator for the district attorney in Socorro County. This woman told my mom that she had given an alibi to Jacob's killer because my mom said she didn't think that Jacob or that her boyfriend was capable of intentionally hurting Jacob.
That's a character witness, not an alibi. Like,
Correct.
do we need to get a glossary? Like,
It's
I'm
also
a
a
little
feeling.
confused.
It's also a feeling. It's
Right.
not even
It's an
concrete.
opinion.
Correct. So, but they were referring to Mr. Gordon, Mr. I'm like, "Okay, wow." Didn't even bother to, like,
Mhm.
look into this, right? So that's my first clue. Second clue is when I get to, I think, page 3, and I see the notes of a conversation they had with the doctor who was the supervisor for the medical investigator at the time.
Mhm.
Charlie, in 3 years, they talked to one doctor.
And that's pretty much all they had.
That's all they had. So they said, again, we're going to consider this closed unless you have a different opinion. So, of course, I had a different opinion.
Yeah, you're like, "Surely there's more than this."
So I said, I'm having a really hard time here, and I'm hoping that you can clarify this for me. It appears to me, based on the information that you've provided, that over the last 3 years that you've had this case, your investigation consisted of reviewing what I gave you and talking to one person. Do I understand that correctly? So again, quiet for a while. And I'm just going to read this because I think it makes sense to read this right now. So I get this email back from them and they're explaining their position. All right. It says, I conferred with the prosecutors to understand and relay the reasons for the decision not to proceed. They reiterated that the standard of proof they need to meet is beyond a reasonable doubt. Our prosecutors do not feel that additional statements can overcome the evidentiary discrepancies or weaknesses. Some of the factors that affected the decision, as explained to you during the in person meeting with our prosecutors, included Brenda Crawford's initial alibi given. The initial statements that some injuries were caused by someone else, aka me, the lack of a confirmed timeline for the injuries, and the inability of current medical professionals to verify details. With a lack of reliable evidence, they do not think additional statements can change the outcome or secure a conviction. So, with this communication, I am now confirming that this matter has been closed. And I wrote back to them, and I'm happy to read that. Just a moment here. I believe I sent that in the group chat, actually. I'm never gonna find it there. Let me go to my sent
We
messages.
chat a little bit, a little
We
much in
we
there.
chat a lot, yeah. Um, Essentially, I said that, I'm not gonna find it. I said that my mom could not alibi him,
Mhm.
that it was not possible because nobody was with him when Jacob was injured. Um, and then I turned around and I said that, first of all, if they're calling this a thorough investigation, that I strongly object to it, and that I asked them, why would you not talk to the person who's already confessed twice?
Right.
Why would you not just try to put a little bit of pressure on him to see if he's
Mhm.
gonna be like, "Hey, you know what? My guilt's eating at me. I'll sign whatever paper you put in front of me. Give me a plea deal. Let me go to
Mhm.
prison." Like, I could see a scenario where that happens.
Yeah.
They don't think that additional statements would be of evidentiary value. If you have questions about what my mom said, why not talk to her? They didn't talk to
Right.
her. They didn't talk to me. They didn't talk to the killer. They didn't talk to anybody. They talked to
Mhm.
one person. So, yeah, so I was very, very, very mad. Um, and I started posting on social media,
Mhm.
and I tagged the Socorro paper, and they called me.
Yeah. Well, you also tagged the Socorro PD,
Oh
and they
yeah, we got
and they deleted their Twitter account. Like,
yeah,
because you were like, "Oh my gosh, they blocked me," and I said, because I had tweeted at them too, and I said, "They must have blocked me too," and then I went and I looked at in, an alt account that
yeah.
I mean, it's in my name, but it's like they wouldn't have known it
They
was
wouldn't
me.
have known. Yeah,
Yeah, and so I went and I looked and I said, "No, Eric, they deleted their entire account." Like, it was they couldn't
uh,
even take one tweet. You've had to live
no,
with this for 3 decades.
yeah, almost 4, almost
Almost
4.
4.
Yeah,
Shocking.
that made me laugh, but it also, I think, says a lot, right? It says a
Mhm.
lot about what they're feeling,
Yeah.
um, about this. So, yeah, so they deleted their Twitter, and I I requested the alibi. I was
Mhm.
like I
Yeah.
was like, "Okay, if you're leaning on this evidence, then I wanna see it. I wanna see
Mhm.
where she wrote this down. I wanna see where she signed it. Because if it's an alibi, like, you would have that
Right, where's
documented."
that statement?
Um, so then 2 days ago, or was it yesterday? It was 2 days ago, I think. Yeah, it was Tuesday. My mom had come to visit me, and we were strategizing, talking about how we're gonna move forward with the case, because
Mhm.
we're not giving up. In case anybody's wondering, it's not gonna happen. Um, if anything, we're gonna get louder and
Mhm.
probably more obnoxious. Um, I've already been more obnoxious. So, uh, this call, Charlie, is gonna be really hard for me to go all the way into it, but I'm gonna do my best, and then you can edit out. So, because some of the stuff I said,
If you guys just hear a beep, just know.
just know that that's coming. So the phone rings, and I get this, and like, "Hi, this is Eric." "Hi, Eric. This is Maria Madrid with the New Mexico Department of Justice, your family advocate, and I'm just calling to check in and see how you're doing today." So I told her. And what I didn't know is that, Greer is her name. One of the attorneys, involved in the case was also sitting there, and so she jumped in as I started to kind of tell Maria how I was doing today. Um, and Greer took a very condescending tone with me. She's like, "Well, as I've explained to you and your mom on January 11th, there are a lot of problems with this investigation, with this case that I can't overcome." I said, "Oh, you can't overcome it, Greer? Really? I wonder if it's because you only talked to one person in 3 years. Do you think maybe that had anything to do with the fact that you can't overcome this evidence issue?" She's like, "Well, we never said anything about reinvestigating. We said we would review the case, and I did." I said, "And it took you 3 years to do that, huh?" Wow,
I
you
did
must be
that before my podcast episode. I
I'm like,
am
wow,
like,
you must be really proud of yourself for all the hard work you put in reviewing the case for 3 years and coming up empty-handed. And I said, "You know what? At least Hector had the balls to meet my mom and I.
mhm.
Where was Raul?" "Well, I don't think that you're being very fair." I said, "That's funny because there's a lot of that going around right now, Greer." And she's like, "Well, your mom's alibi." I'm like, "Yeah, let's talk about the alibi. How's that public records inspection coming along?
You're like,
Where
"The
is
alibi
that?"
is exactly what I wanna talk about."
I'd really like to see that. She's like, "Well, that's what I was gonna tell you is like, I feel like you're very confused by this." I'm like, "I am confused. I'm confused how the word alibi came out of your mouth in reference to my mom and this person, because there has never been an alibi. And if you are a good lawyer, you would know that that's true. Nobody could alibi him. He was alone." She's like, "Oh, well, what I was talking about was when there's all this doubt about you being involved in this." And I'm
You
like,
were in
"Okay."
another state.
I said, "Okay, well, first of all, yeah, I was in California when Jacob died." She's like, "Well, we can't prove if the first injury or the second injury is what, like, caused his death." And I was like, "Okay, but that's still not an alibi." Well, she's like, At any rate, I can't overcome that." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, answer me this question, Greer. As a prosecutor, don't you think that it makes sense to talk to this person after he confessed twice already? Like, did it cross your mind that you could try to put the tiniest amount of pressure on him to see if he cracks?" And she's like, "I've been a prosecutor for so many years and I know all about these cases and I know." And I said, "You know what? I'm sick of prosecutors trying cases in their mind. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're guessing." I said, "Yes, you have experience." I said, "But you didn't even bother to try with this case. And don't try to tell me that you did." She's like, "Well, it's just really unfortunate that we couldn't come to a different conclusion." I said, "Yeah, you know what else is unfortunate? Greer getting molested." And she says, "Oh, well, that's horrific." I said, "Yeah, too bad nobody cares." And I said, "That's fine, though. Don't worry about it, Greer. I'm going to hire a private investigator, and they're going to do an investigation, an actual investigation. And then, hopefully, the only time I ever talk to you again is when I'm coming to your office to bring you the evidence on a silver platter. And hopefully, in that moment, you'll decide to do your fucking job." So that's what happened.
Well, I'm gonna say that when they chose, and it was a choice,
Mhm.
to blame the issues with the case on you and your mom, and not on the fact that they lost 2 confessions,
Mhm.
not on the fact that they let him walk away with a failed polygraph, not on the fact that this case was clearly he was given a pass. He was given a, "Oh, he lost his temper. He must have lost his temper. Well, let's give him the benefit of the doubt." Like, they did all that. That's not the reason. It's because
Mm-mm.
you and your mom. Like, the fact that they just will not take accountability and say, "The early investigation screwed this so badly that I don't know how we're gonna recover from that." Instead, they're blaming you guys, which is absolutely ridiculous.
I think I could accept that because I agree. I agree that that investigation was garbage.
Mhm.
But, like, to not even try to
Yeah,
investigate this was a slap in the face.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
what that says to me is, like, they were hoping that they could just quietly do this and we would slink away into the dark and the memory of
Mhm.
Jacob would be forgotten and nobody would ever know. Well, they've got another thing coming.
It absolutely is shocking to me that I've listened to any number of podcasts on Jacob's case, and they all did more research. They all know the gender of who's involved. Kendall Ray did more of an investigation on this. And
Yeah.
I'm like, how is that possible that this is what we have?" And I know for you, it's not even just about your family, it's that you know that behind Jacob are all these other families that haven't found their voice or
Mhm.
have just lost their voice over the years where, thankfully, I mean, one of the greatest things about independent podcasting is that it's giving people their voices, but, there's so many other families, and it's a matter of like, the whole system needs to
Yeah.
be on trial, not just your stepfather.
Yeah. New Mexico has always failed at protecting its most vulnerable citizens.
Mhm.
Jacob happened 37 years ago, but it didn't stop with him, and it didn't start with him. It's been
Right.
going on ever since. And every time a kid dies at the hands of an abuser, everybody throws their hands up, they gnash their teeth, they cry, they make public statements on the news, the legislators talk, they have special days for Victoria Martins, and,
Mhm.
you know, none of that does anything if we're not willing to make the hard decisions and protect these kids from people like the guy who killed my brother.
Yeah.
And I've decided that, and my mom has decided that we are going to expose all of this
Mhm.
nationally, internationally, to whoever will listen to us.
Yeah.
We are going to make sure that everybody knows how New Mexico has failed, not just Jacob, not just me, not just my mom, but countless people who are
Mhm.
still waiting for justice. And if it continues the way it's been going, that justice may never come.
Yeah, the only way to stop injustice from happening again is to hold those accountable who inflicted it in the first place.
That's
And
it.
so if there's some accountability, if investigators worry about those cases that come back to haunt them later, maybe they'll do a better job investigating the first time.
Yeah. I hope so. I really do. And look, I am not a hater of law enforcement, but my experience with law enforcement hasn't been great.
Right.
And every time they get involved in this case, they make it worse.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I'm going private because, maybe if I'm paying some, I mean, not like we're not paying these people,
Right.
but maybe if I'm like physically paying somebody, maybe
Mhm.
they will do the right thing. But that I apologize, like if I've gotten too angry and crossed the line, but uh, I've been holding this in for 37 years, and I'm done. I'm done holding it in.
Well, as you talked about the game of advocacy, especially for a case that has such high stakes for you personally, is that you try to play nice. You try to go along to get along. You try to attract more flies with honey, and but then at some point you just got to spill the vinegar everywhere because it didn't work.
Yeah, it's true.
And so I think your anger isn't new. It's just you can express it publicly now
Yeah,
because what else are you gonna do? They've said they're not gonna do anything, so playing nice isn't going to change the outcome.
no, no, and I don't feel bad about talking to them the way that I talk to
Mhm.
them. Because I feel like they need to hear it. They need to
Yeah.
hear it. They need to realize that these are real lives and real tragedy that has happened to people. This is not something
Mhm.
that you can just disconnect yourself from and treat it like a traffic violation, because it's
Right.
not.
Yeah. So where are we now as far as I know you've got stuff in the works on your end.
Mm.
I know you have your nonprofit going, and that's helping just broadly families in New Mexico. But what can our listeners do now to help Justice for Jacob?
Yeah, I say this a lot, but sharing Jacob's story goes a long
Mm.
way. The thing about it is, like, it seems like such an insignificant thing, but we're trying to build momentum and put
Mhm.
pressure on the attorney general to do the right thing, to do an investigation on this case.
Mhm.
And so, by the time you hear this episode, we'll have a new petition built for the attorney general. So signing that, sharing that definitely
Mhm.
goes a long way. If you know personal attorneys that work on things like this, and somebody that you think might be an asset to this case,
Mhm.
send them my way. Let me know, because we're looking for somebody to help represent us and our interests as victims in this crime. Um, I'm working with a PI right now. I'm hoping that works out. But if it doesn't, and a PI, like, I will always
Mhm.
take a referral on that. We might need a team of people
Mhm.
to investigate this, and so I'm open to that as well. But sharing the story, signing the petition, and then the next step, whether you know somebody in media or you can just share the post and tag media, we're actively pursuing media for this case. We want to shine a
Mhm.
light on what's happened here. We want to shine a light not just on Jacob's case, but on all the other forgotten children in New Mexico. It's an epidemic here. And the only way that we're going to expect anything to change is if we start talking about this and start uh, making sure that Raul Torres knows that he has nowhere to hide. And if he
Mhm.
plans on continuing a career in politics, then he needs to do right by the citizens who elected him to be in that office. Another thing, real quick, and then I'll shut up, Charlie. I'm sorry. I'm on a roll
No,
today.
keep going.
This is the most I've talked, I
I
think,
know
on
our
this
listeners are
show.
gonna be like, "Oh, that's what he sounds like when
Weird.
Charlie's not talking all the time."
So the last thing is, in April, I'm going to do another 10 Days of April
Mhm.
campaign. This one focused specifically on the Attorney General. So I'm sure we'll post details in our social
Mhm.
media here on Crime Lines and Consequences. But yeah, we would love your help with that and your participation with that. The more people that call and email and harass them, the better, in my opinion.
And in the event someone who does know something, who
Mm.
knows this person who's maybe heard him say something over the years, decides to Google Jacob's name, can they reach out directly to you if they have information or if they were a victim of abuse at the hands of this person?
Yes, absolutely. Let me know, because we're stronger in numbers. The
Mhm.
more people that come forward, the stronger the case will be. And I think it'll create kind of that understanding of a pattern that we know
Mhm.
exists. So if you know my mom, Brenda Crawford, or me, I was Eric Lundeen back then, not Eric Carter Lundeen. Um, my grandmother's Merlinda Crawford. You can, if you're from Socorro, you can figure it out. They got married in the church by a pastor that's been there forever. Um,
It's not a big town. You know who we're talking
it's
about.
not a big town. It's not a big town. So yeah, if that's the case, would love to talk
Mhm.
to you, and would love to talk about how we could all work together to get justice.
Yeah. All right. And if anyone has any questions for Eric or just has thoughts on the case, you can find us on social media pretty much everywhere. And that's where we will keep advocacy stuff up to date. You can also follow True Consequences, which is Eric's main podcast, I guess we'd call it. It's where we got part of our name of this podcast. If you follow him there, I
Mhm.
mean, you won't miss a thing.
You'll get more information than you want, probably.
Well, I'm always wanting more information, but I don't always wanna bug you because I know it can
Yeah,
get overwhelming when you're dealing with things. So I'm glad you suggested we just record one big session of update.
yeah. Thank you for doing this with me, Charlie. Uh,
Yeah.
it's gonna make it easier. I'm gonna put this on my True Consequences feed too. So
Yeah, it'll keep everyone informed. And, do you wanna give them an update on what our guest for our next episode is gonna be?
oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, so you are going to hear a conversation between my mom and I, and we're going to be talking through kind of what we were feeling as all of this was happening, but also some of the things that we've encountered as we've been advocating for Jacob's case and some of the things in true crime that we've experienced that we'd like to see changed. So it's going to be a little bit more about the advocacy journey and a lot more about kind of where we are as family members who have been fighting for justice.
And hearing from your mom is just invaluable because I know she doesn't do as much media as you do, but
Mhm.
I mean, she was Jacob's mom and also a victim of this individual. So adding her perspective and is going to really add to the conversation. So
I
I
agree.
appreciate her agreeing to do that for our show.
Yeah, me too. And with that,
Yeah.
follow us on social media, right? We already did that. So with
Yeah.
that, we'll talk to you next time.